Where was God on September 11th, 2001? Where were you? You should have kept this from happening. People genuinely asking the question out of a hurting heart, desperate to understand how such a thing could happen. God, why did this happen? Why did my loved one or child or friend have to die? We're still trying to make sense of that tragedy, as well as others that happen nationally and globally and in our personal lives. Where are you, God? We don't know why God intervenes with some and does not appear to with others, but we believe He loves us and is with us to help us avoid eternal tragedy. Isaiah 43, 2-3 says, "When you pass through the waters, I will be with you. And when you pass through the rivers, they will not sweep over you. And when you walk through the fire, you will not be burned. The flames will not set you ablaze, for I am the Lord your God, the Holy One of Israel, your Savior." One day the Lord will make things plain regarding His children who have drowned due to hurricanes and floods, and those who have been taken by senseless fires or violence or sickness. And we get to see that God is there for us as He was for His people back on September 11th, 2001. Our God was very busy on 9/11. He was discouraging people from taking those 4 flights. Together they could accommodate more than 1,000 passengers, yet there were only 266 aboard. He was on those 4 flights, giving the terrified passengers the ability to stay calm. Not one of the people who was called by a loved one, a friend, in the hijacked planes mentioned that passengers were panicked, nor was there any screaming in the background. And on Flight 93, God gave strength to the passengers to overcome the hijackers, sparing the U.S. Capitol or the White House or a nuclear power plant. God was also busy creating obstacles to prevent people who worked at the World Trade Center from getting to work on time. The workday had begun. More than 50,000 people worked in the 2 towers, yet only 20,000 were at their desks, and of these, most escaped. On that beautiful morning, scores of extra unexpected traffic delays were reported. Subway delays and commuter train delays. A PATH train packed with commuters was stopped at a signal just short of the World Trade Center and was able to return to Jersey City. And far more meetings were scheduled elsewhere than was usual. The 2 mighty towers seemed to be held up by a supernatural force for a half hour so that the people on the lower floors could get out. And when they finally let go, who caused the towers to fall inward rather than to topple over, which would have killed so many more people? The foundations of 6 surrounding buildings were demolished by the fall of the towers. But how, or rather who, held them up for many hours until all the occupants were safely evacuated? When the 4 flights, the World Trade Center, the Pentagon went down, our God received the spirits or breaths of almost 3,000 of His children. He also sat down and cried that 19 of His kids could have so much hatred in their hearts that they did not choose love but bitterness to their own destruction. God was present in the multitudes of people trained in dealing with earthly disasters to save those who were injured. And God was present in the many public servants who were willing to give their lives for their fellow men like Christ did on the cross. And He brought people together across the world in a way that moved millions to tears and billions to prayer and caused multitudes to turn to the Lord. He still isn't finished. Every day He comforts those who lose loved ones. As believers, we get to pray for the leaders of our great nation to have divine wisdom and conviction to do the right thing, to follow His will, and to make things not worse, but better for God's children, both here and abroad. So when the question is asked, where was God on 9/11? We can thankfully respond, He was everywhere. And in fact, He is everywhere today and every day. With God, life is hopeful. Our best days are ahead because God is with us. Nothing can defeat us eternally. Listen to this story reported by the Washington Post for the special edition for 9/11, 2021. Janelle Guzman woke on the morning of September 12, 2000 and one in a terrible darkness, unable to move, feeling her 30-year-old body fading. Her head was wedged between broken slabs of concrete, and her legs were pinned beneath something she could not see. She has spent the long night flitting in and out of consciousness, but she was alert now, jarred awake by pain and aware of the essential facts of the previous day. Her workplace, the World Trade Center's North Tower, had collapsed, and she was buried alive. She found that she could move her left arm, which she used to clear away the dust that coated her eyes and face. But in the blackness, she could not see her wristwatch and had no way of judging how long she had been trapped. With her fingers, she probed the edges of her tomb, which at first felt unbearably hot, but had now turned cold. She tugged at something soft directly beneath her. It was fabric of some kind, a piece of clothing. She let it go. Outside a full day had passed. Americans were absorbing the shock of the terrorist attacks on New York City and Washington when history turned in a single hour. In the vast debris field where the World Trade Center had stood, firefighters had long ago rescued the last of the handful of people who were found alive, huddled in the stairwell or in an underground passageway. Now, K-9 recovery teams were beginning their grim work, sniffing through rubble piles less than 100 feet from where Guzman lay. Guzman could hear nothing of the world above her. In her wakefulness, the Trinidadian immigrant and clerical worker took inventory of her injuries, willing her mind to survey every inch of skin and muscle along her shattered legs. She repeated remembered prayers and offered up new ones. She made promises to God and to herself. Her thoughts returned again to the previous morning, September 11th. She had just arrived for her temp job on the North Tower's 64th floor and was chatting with another worker over a bagel when it happened. First came a strange booming sound like a distant explosion, and then the terrifying sensation of swaying as top floors of the 110-story building swung outward and back again like a palm tree bending with the wind. She ran to a window and gaped at the strange spectacle of thousands of pieces of paper floating in midair like a confetti squall more than 60 stories above the ground. She should have fled at once, as others did, but she had not heard an order to evacuate, and Guzman, who had overstayed her U.S. visa and didn't want to draw attention to herself, was afraid to leave her post without permission. So she sat with her friend, a fellow secretary named Rosa, and the two made phone calls and waited together for more than an hour. Finally, when smoke began visibly wafting through the elevator shafts, the women joined a group of stragglers that was headed toward one of the emergency stairwells. Holding hands, the two friends began the slow descent in their dress heels, starting at the 64th floor and continuing downward through the 50s and then the 40s, passing firefighters who called out words of encouragement as they trudged upstairs against the tide of office workers. Her group had made it to the 13th floor when Guzman decided that her heels finally had to go. She paused and stopped just long enough to slip off a shoe, and as she did, the walls of the stairwell exploded around her. She felt Rosa's hand slip away, and then the stairs disappeared, along with walls and railings and people. She crouched and shielded her face as hundreds of unseen objects collided and smashed all around her. Everything went dark, and Guzman believed she would die. By an unfathomable chance, she did not. After lying for hours inside the tiny cavity that both protected and entombed her, she became dimly aware of sounds, a siren, or the beeping of a truck that was backing up somewhere not far away. And then a voice. Someone was yelling something. Guzman summoned up all her energy and shouted back as loudly as she could, "Please help me." As she had done many times, Guzman used her free hand to claw at the loose rubble in the gaps between the concrete slabs above her. This time, some of the debris gave way, and she could see a faint gray light. She dug some more and soon found that the hole was big enough that she could squeeze her hand through it. From the other side, another hand grasped hers. "I've got you," the rescuer said. It took more than an hour to remove the steel beams that had pinned Guzman's legs. Afterward, she felt herself being lifted into the sunlight and gently placed in a basket-like stretcher. The rescue workers formed a human chain, and the basket was passed along the line of helmeted figures down the treacherous slopes of the debris pile to the street below. At the bottom, a sudden roar erupted from the throng of firefighters and police officers. It was a spontaneous outburst of cheers for the rescue of Guzman, who after 27 hours trapped in the rubble was the last person pulled alive from the ruins of the World Trade Center. In complete bewilderment, she looked up into the face of a medical technician. "Are you taking me home?" she asked.